Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for the U.S. Astronaut Hall of Fame induction ceremony honoring our nation's space heroes. Please rise for the presentation of colors, followed by the national anthem performed by Susie Cunningham of Kennedy Space Center's Advanced Planning Office.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome today's Master of Ceremonies, former CNN correspondent and award-winning journalist, Mr. John Zarella.
Thank you. Thank you, Boy Scout Troop 481 from Titusville. And Susie just does a remarkable job every time. Susie, really, just terrific. We love you, Susie. How's everybody doing? Good? Good. We have a great crowd. I understand we had to add 150 extra seats in here today. I think it's mostly Duffy's family is what I was told was here. So, and the grandkids and all of that, right? Welcome everyone. It is so good to be here again as the Master of Ceremonies. As two space shuttle heroes are inducted into the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame. Both of our inductees flew aboard this magnificent machine, which is overhead, Space Shuttle Atlantis. And I know many of our other astronauts here have flown on Atlantis as well. There is no better place to host this occasion than right here with Atlantis. And now it is my privilege to introduce to you the attending members of the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame. Now, astronauts, please stand, turn, and wave when I call your names. Al Warden, you've got that? Stand, turn, and wave. That's three things I know. Okay. He logged 143 hours in space as the lunar module pilot on Apollo 13. Later, he helped characterize the space shuttle's flying qualities and performance during descent and landing as commander of one of the two-person crews who piloted the space shuttle approach and landing test flights. Fred Hayes. Command module pilot for Apollo 15 and a 9-year NASA veteran, he logged a 38-minute spacewalk outside the Endeavour command module to retrieve film from the panoramic and mapping cameras. He logged 295 hours and 11 minutes in space. Al Warden. He was the lunar module pilot on Apollo 16 mission, the 5th mission to land humans on the moon. He and Commander John Young stayed for 71 hours and 14 minutes on the lunar surface, a record at the time of the flight. He has logged 265 hours in space. Charlie Duke. This astronaut was the science pilot on his first flight, Skylab 3. A decade later, he served as a mission specialist aboard Space Shuttle Columbia on STS-9, the first flight of Spacelab, demonstrating the shuttle's capability for advanced science research in Earth orbit. He has logged more than 1,600 hours in space. Owen Garriott. He served as pilot for Skylab 3, during which he worked in orbit for 59 days and spent 11 hours on 2 spacewalks outside the space station. Later, he commanded the 3rd orbital test flight of Space Shuttle Columbia, STS-3. Jack Lausma. As the command module pilot on the Apollo-Soyuz test project, he was one of the first U.S. astronauts to meet in space with Russian cosmonauts. He went on to command STS-5, the first fully operational shuttle flight, STS-41B, the first landing here at Kennedy Space Center, and STS-35, the first shuttle mission dedicated to astronomy. Vance Brand. This astronaut piloted Columbia in 1981 on STS-1, the very first space shuttle mission. He went on to command 3 more missions, including STS-7, which conducted the first deployment and retrieval exercise with the Shuttle Pallet satellite. He later served as director of NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Bob Crippen. During his 19 years with the astronaut program, he logged more than 386 hours in space and flew on 3 shuttle missions. He served as pilot during the maiden voyage of Shuttle Challenger aboard STS-6, as commander of STS-51D, and as the commander of STS-51J, the first flight of the Space Shuttle Atlantis. Carol Bo Bobko. A 3 spaceflight veteran, he was on the first crew to fly an orbiter in close proximity to a free-flying satellite on STS-7. He then commanded STS-51A and later STS-26, which marked the space shuttle's return to flight following the Challenger tragedy. Rick Houck. A veteran of 4 space shuttle missions, he piloted STS-8, the first mission with a night launch and landing. He commanded STS-51G and spent 26 hours in space during STS-32, the longest shuttle mission at the time. He later commanded STS-49, the maiden flight of Space Shuttle Endeavour. Dan Brandenstein. Logging more than 500 hours in space, he piloted STS-9 and later commanded STS-61B and STS-28. He also played a key role in returning the shuttle to flight following the Challenger tragedy, leading the Space Shuttle Orbiter Return to Flight team. Brewster Shaw. This astronaut, a veteran of 5 space shuttle flights, served as pilot for STS-41B, which culminated in the first landing on Kennedy Space Center's runway. He then commanded STS-61C, STS-27, 47, and 71, the first space shuttle mission to dock with the Russian space station Mir. Robert Hoot Gibson. A veteran of 5 space shuttle missions, STS-51D, STS-35, STS-46, 61, and 75. He became the first astronaut to log 1,000 hours on the space shuttle and made NASA's first shuttle contingency spacewalk. He has logged 21.5 million miles in space. Jeff Hoffman. She's a veteran of 3 space shuttle missions, including the first 2 flights of the Space Lab Life Sciences payload that expanded our understanding of space and life sciences. On her 3rd mission, she served as payload commander on STS-58, the 2nd flight of Space Lab, and ultimately logged more than 722 hours in space during her astronaut career. Ray Seddon. A 4-time space shuttle veteran, he has logged more than 646 hours in space. He distinguished himself as the pilot of Discovery for the shuttle program's return to flight mission following the Challenger tragedy, and as commander of the first Hubble Space Telescope servicing mission. Dick Covey. She logged more than 1,200 hours, 50 days in space. She served as mission specialist for STS-61A and STS-32 and payload commander on STS-50 and STS-89. In 1995, she made history aboard Atlantis on STS-71 by docking with the Russian space station Mir. Bonnie Dunbar. A veteran of 4 space shuttle flights, he piloted STS-61C and STS-31, which deployed the Hubble Space Telescope, then served as commander for STS-45 and STS-60, logging more than 680 hours in space. Today, he serves as NASA Administrator Charlie Bolden. She has logged more than 975 hours in space, including more than 21 hours of extravehicular activity. She flew 4 space shuttle missions, including STS-49, the maiden flight of the Space Shuttle Endeavour. Kathy Thornton. This 6-time space shuttle flyer served as pilot on his first flight, STS-32, and went on to command his next 5 missions, including the first U.S. flight operations with the Russian Mir space station and the first exchange of resident crew members on the International Space Station. He has logged nearly 1,600 hours in space. James Weatherby. This astronaut's first flight also was the maiden voyage of Space Shuttle Endeavour. He served as pilot on STS-59 and commanded STS-76, the 3rd shuttle docking with Mir. He has logged more than 704 hours in space. Kevin Chilton. This veteran of 4 space shuttle flights first served as a mission specialist on STS-55. He then served as pilot on STS-71, the first shuttle docking with Mir. He went on to command 2 more flights to Mir, STS-84 and STS-91, the final docking of the Shuttle Mir program. He has logged more than 932 hours in space. Charlie Precourt. He racked up more than 1,600 hours in space on his 5 space shuttle missions. He commanded the first shuttle docking to the fledgling International Space Station on STS-96, and then led the 7-person STS-100 crew on a mission to install the station's Canadarm2. Kent Rominger. Ladies and gentlemen, our Hall of Fame astronauts. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome the Chief Operating Officer of Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex, Mr. Theron Protze. Theron?
You know, John does such an amazing job, and you know, I always come up here and try to be kind of stiff as a board, so you know, I thought about playing the whole John Zarella role today. Has anybody ever seen he'll lean on the podium and just kind of kick back? He just does an amazing job. Good afternoon and welcome to today's ceremony. We're here to welcome 2 Space Shuttle veterans into the U.S. Astronaut Hall of Fame's 15th class of shuttle astronaut inductees. Can we give them a round of applause, please? Absolutely exciting. To all of you that are gathered here, and on behalf of the 60,000 Delaware North associates worldwide, including the entire team here at the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex, thank you for being with us. It is our honor to host today's ceremony to welcome NASA astronauts Brian Duffy, Scott Parazynski into this elite group of space explorers and pioneers. At Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex, our goal is to tell the NASA story in the most compelling and immersive way possible, to give everyone of any age the chance to truly understand the challenges, the problem solving, the hard work, and the swell of pride that achievements in space can bring to humankind. Astronauts are such an important part of the NASA story. Through their eyes and their stories, we all have the chance to appreciate spaceflight as an insider. Soon, those stories will be brought to life in an entirely new way. The U.S. Astronaut Hall of Fame will be a component of the new Heroes and Legends attraction opening later this year. You might have seen it as you walked in today. Through this state-of-the-art technology, guests will have the opportunity to virtually interact with our astronaut inductees and experience the thrills of our space program like never before. Heroes and Legends will feature an omnidirectional 4D experience of Earth and space as astronauts share their stories and adventures. An interactive zone will allow guests to see priceless space artifacts, come alive and exhibits up close, and explore multimedia and interactive features. And of course, the newly designed U.S. Astronaut Hall of Fame will round out the experience, leaving guests with a deeper understanding and appreciation for the challenges and accomplishments of the U.S. space program. Just this spring, we also launched Cosmic Quest, a live interaction adventure based on real NASA missions, offering a truly immersive experience. Guests can capture an asteroid, launch a rocket, create a habitat on Mars, and even conduct research on the International Space Station. On April 29th, we also launched the all-new 3D IMAX film, A Beautiful Planet, narrated by Jennifer Lawrence, and this documentary features spectacular views of Earth captured by astronauts living aboard the space station. And then coming this summer, guests will be able to take a holographic journey on the Red Planet in Destination Mars. NASA and Microsoft have joined forces to provide this guided tour of Mars using a real imagery from the agency's Curiosity Mars rover and the Microsoft HoloLens mixed reality headset. Astronaut legend Buzz Aldrin serves as the ultimate tour guide as guests set out on the adventure on Martian soil. There's even more innovations coming on the horizon, and we are so excited about the future of the complex. Today's children need to have fun learning about science, technology, engineering, and math in order to become tomorrow's space explorers. That's what every new exhibit or every hands-on experience is all about. I'd like to recognize the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation for doing such an amazing job, their board of directors, Executive Director Tammy Sudler, and her staff and volunteers for their contributions to today's outstanding ceremony. It's a true honor to work together with ASF on behalf of Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex. Thank you for years of dedicated service and the incredible job you have done and will continue to do, honoring our nation's astronauts and helping to pave the next generation road to the stars. Lastly, and most importantly, congratulations to this year's inductees, Brian Duffy and Scott Parazynski. Thank you so very much.
That wasn't bad, Theron. But you know, JZ Media, shameless plug, does offer media training. So if you would like, I'll be glad to do you some coaching on the Zarella format. There you go. And now it is my pleasure to welcome to the podium Hall of Fame astronaut NASA Administrator and my friend, Charlie Bolden.
Okay, it says Bolden speaks for 3 minutes. That lies. John, thanks very much for your kind introduction. And I have to say, I'm quite honored to be here with this great crowd today and to represent KSC Center Director Bob Cabana in welcoming you to the incredible Kennedy Space Center, America's launch pad to the universe. Bob, I think all of you know would be here, except some of you don't know. He lost his mother this past week and returned home to be with the family. So I would ask that all of you keep Bob and his family in your thoughts and prayers. I'd also like to join others in congratulating the scholars. That's actually one of the big reasons we get together on this weekend. So to the astronaut scholars, past, present, and even some futures out there climbing around, congratulations. You know, I think if Bob were here, he'd tell you how proud he is of his superb KSC team that's hard at work every day transitioning the Kennedy Space Center to a 21st century multi-user spaceport. From modernization of the critical ground systems, such as a new mobile launcher, to support the Space Launch System, or SLS, heavy-lift rocket, in manufacture today to carry Orion and our astronaut crews to deep space destinations only dreamed of in the past. Then there are the game-changing improvements to Launch Complex 39B with its new all-fiber communications and control systems. Or we can journey into the vastly improved Operations and Checkout, or ONC building, now hosting assembly of the second Orion crew module in preparation for the first flight of the integrated SLS and Orion system for EM1, or Exploration Mission 1. Or we could go to the VAB, the Vehicle Assembly Building, being restructured to accommodate SLS booster and core stage stacking. As the host of our commercial partners, we have handed over numerous facilities, such as the new Boeing CST-100 assembly facility, formerly known as OPF, or Orbiter Processing Facility 3, or the SpaceX Falcon Heavy Launch Complex, LC-39A, from where Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins launched on the historic Apollo 11 mission to land on the moon. There are more facilities scheduled for commercial transition and use. Our Launch Services Program, LSP, is now more busy than ever with diverse missions and preparation under their watchful eye. OSIRIS-REx, the Origin Spectral Interpretation Resource Identification Security and Regolith Explorer. GOES-R, Geostationary Operational Environment Satellite R-Series, and Cygnus. Those are all scheduled before the end of this calendar year. And then Joint Polar Satellite System, or JPSS-1, the Ionospheric Connection Explorer ICON, the Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite TESS, the Tracking and Data Relay Satellite M, or TDRS-M, and Ice Cloud and Land Elevation Satellite 2, or ISAT-2, all scheduled for 2017, the year in which we are still very hopeful to see the first commercial crew vehicles launched from right here on the Space Coast, returning launch of our crews from America once again. Big deal for us. And then Theron's already mentioned it, but coming later this year, what we think will be the spectacular Heroes and Legends exhibit that will house the Astronaut Hall of Fame and bring even more incredible exhibits for the public. But to return to the occasion for today, what an honor it is to be able to join my fellow Astronaut Hall of Fame alums to welcome two wonderful, wonderful people, astronauts Brian Duffy and Scott Parazynski, into the Hall. Brian was on my crew for STS-45. In fact, as my pilot, Brian ran my crew on STS-45. Some of you who know me know how that happens. We were aboard the Space Shuttle Atlantis, one of 4 missions that Brian flew on the shuttle. A test pilot by training, Brian had a distinguished career serving in the U.S. Air Force. Thank you for your service, Colonel Duffy. While I never had the opportunity to fly with Scott, I have long admired his work as a veteran of 5 shuttle missions, 7 EVAs, and equally amazing to me, just his journey to summit Mount Everest. Today, we at NASA are on a journey to Mars that will take American astronauts to an asteroid next decade, and to the red planet in the 2030s. When our astronauts put the first human footsteps on Mars, they will be walking in the footsteps of Hall of Famers like Brian Duffy and Scott Parazynski. When our children's and grandchildren's children benefit from NASA-driven advances in medicine, technology, earth science, they will have the legacy of Hall of Famers like Brian and Scott to thank. Whenever young Americans stand out in areas like exploration, innovation, and cooperation, they will be standing on the shoulders of Hall of Famers like Brian and Scott. Ralph Waldo Emerson once commented that, and I quote, "If the stars should appear but one night every 1,000 years, how man would marvel and stare," end quote. Of course, the stars come out a little more frequently than just once every 1,000 years. Their nightly appearances are just a part of life. In a way, the same can be said for all the progress we've made in space exploration. The new heights we've reached, thanks to astronauts like Brian and Scott, have become so ingrained in our culture that we don't always think about just how incredible, how absolutely incredible, all that we have achieved actually is. I like to call the young Americans of today the space generation. President Obama calls them the Mars generation, because of the expansive way in which they look at our universe. When I tell my 3 beautiful granddaughters, for example, that we're going to Mars, they ask me, why stop there? I tell them, let me get to Mars first. The ability to Skype with a friend halfway around the world, or watch a movie that's reaching their living room via satellite is just routine for them. Anyone, as a matter of fact, who is age 15 now, soon age 16 or younger, has not lived a single day of his or her life. In fact, not one single second of his or her life when human beings from different countries have not been living and working on the International Space Station together 250 miles above our planet. With this in mind, one of the wonderful gifts of this Hall of Fame is that it gives an opportunity to hit the pause button for a moment, to take a step back, take a deep breath for a moment, and reflect on just how far we really have come. So I want to invite all of you, as we celebrate Brian and Scott, to think about just the monumental and impactful, how monumental and impactful those accomplishments of these 2 great Americans truly are, and what they mean for both our present and our future. Congratulations, Hall of Famers Brian Duffy, and congratulations, Hall of Famer Scott Parazynski. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bolden. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome to the stage Hall of Fame astronaut and Astronaut Scholarship Foundation Chairman, Dan Brandenstein. Dan?
Thank you, John, and good afternoon to everyone, and thank you all for being here with us today. We're very pleased to welcome Brian and Scott into the U.S. Astronaut Hall of Fame. As the chairman of the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation, it gives me great pride to look out across the faces of my fellow astronauts and also the guests here today. Back in the 80s, the original Mercury 7 astronauts decided that there should be a place to celebrate astronauts' accomplishments that shares the side of human spaceflight in a unique and personal way. Their dream of the U.S. Astronaut Hall of Fame came to reality in 1990. And now, look how far we've come since then. You heard Theron talking about the new one going up right across the way here. The Hall of Fame seeks to celebrate and inspire more than that, the goal of keeping America on the leading edge of technology and innovation. And that means encouraging students to aim high, dream big, and pursue their careers in science, technology, engineering, and math. That's where the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation comes into play. ASF awards merit-based scholarships to the best and brightest students working toward careers in those fields. The prestigious Astronaut Scholarship is known nationwide as one of the highest scholarships awarded to undergraduate STEM students. Since its inception, ASF has awarded over $4 million worth of scholarships to over 400 scholars. Now, the last astronaut selection, we were all very excited and thrilled in the foundation because the first astronaut scholar alum, Christina Koch, was selected as a NASA astronaut to begin the training program. Last night at the gala, she shared some of her early childhood visions and inspirations, and also shared with us what receiving the astronaut scholarship meant to her, and the support and inspiration that the astronauts provided her as she went through her schooling and ultimately the rest of her career that has enabled her to arrive at the scholarship program. In the audience with us today, in fact, there's a relatively large group of astronaut scholar recipients. And so if the scholars would all stand so everybody can recognize them, they're truly amazing individuals that have done what they have done and accomplished is really eye-watering. We have a technical conference as part of this program this morning, and we went in and sat and listened to these folks tell us what they're working on, and it's truly mind-boggling. In fact, if I had to repeat any of it, I probably couldn't because most of it went over my head. But they really do a wonderful thing. Well, now we can't get this done alone. We receive a lot of support from all the astronauts, from friends of NASA, and also from NASA with Charlie Bolden, who you heard earlier, Bob Cabana, who couldn't be with us today, as well as Theron Protze, who you also heard of from the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex. And that support is invaluable, and their involvement is truly appreciated. And now, before we continue, I want to pay tribute to two astronauts who have passed away since our last induction ceremony. Hall of Fame Apollo astronaut Edgar Mitchell passed away. He was on our board of directors and was a strong supporter of the foundation for many years. Also, shuttle astronaut Don Williams, who also had supported us at this event many times during his life. They both had remarkable contributions to the exploration of space, and their legacy lives on. Let's take a moment and remember them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. Are you ready? Ladies and gentlemen, now it's time for what we came here for, to begin the induction of the 15th class of Space Shuttle astronauts into the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame. Our first inductee is Brian Duffy.
Three, two, one, and liftoff. Space Shuttle Atlantis.
Houston, Atlantis, in the roll.
Glad to roll, Atlantis. And liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour on their first space mission and the retrieval of the Eureka spacecraft.
Main gear touchdown.
Booster ignition and liftoff of Endeavour.
Koichi's got it, Houston.
We knew the man would come through.
liftoff of Discovery, making shuttle history and building our future in space.
Alan, here you can see us deploying the boom.
We copy.
Main gear touchdown. Nose gear touchdown.
Wheel stop, Houston.
Copy, wheel stop, Brian. Your great landing today made everybody happy. Welcome back to Earth after a super successful mission.
Brian Duffy was selected as a NASA astronaut in June of 1985. Duffy kicked off his astronaut career as a spaceflight communicator and helped develop instrumentation displays as well as procedures for shuttle crews to use on later flights. He flew in space for the first time as the pilot on STS-45 aboard Space Shuttle Atlantis. Launched March 24, 1992, the flight was the first of the Atlas missions to explore the Sun-Earth connection. A year later, Duffy occupied the pilot's seat again on STS-57, this time aboard Endeavour. The 10-day mission launched June 21, 1993, and marked the first flight of the pressurized SpaceHab science module. In January 1996, he stepped into the role of commander on STS-72, leading the 6-person crew of Endeavour. This 9-day flight included 2 spacewalks to help NASA prepare for assembly of the International Space Station. Next, Duffy commanded Shuttle Discovery on October of 2000. That flight, STS-92, saw the installation of the station's first section of backbone, the Z1 truss, and a series of 4 spacewalks to configure and activate it. During his 4 space shuttle missions, Duffy logged more than 40 days in space. Duffy retired from NASA and the United States Air Force in 2001, but he didn't leave the aerospace industry. Today, he is Orbital ATK's Vice President and Program Manager, leading the company's human space exploration activities at the Johnson Space Center and here at Kennedy. Ladies and gentlemen, astronaut Brian Duffy. To present Brian Duffy for induction into the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame, please welcome Hall of Fame astronaut Kevin Chilton.
Thanks, John. Brian just told me, be nice. You know, as you might imagine, we all know too many stories about each other. And my intention is to be today, Brian. Let me add my congratulations to Scott. He'll be coming up here soon to join, but this is my one chance to congratulate him in public, and Brian, you too, of course, for this well-deserved honor. I'd want to also thank the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Center for providing this marvelous venue and support. This is my first time to see Atlantis since I saw her launch on her last flight from just outside the doors at Banana Creek. And I'm just blown away by this facility, and it's so nice that we can have this special event here today. And Dan, I want to thank you for your leadership for the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation. What a tremendous, tremendous organization doing great things for young people in our country that are going to pay back tenfold the investment we make into them. So thank you for that. Mr. Duffy. Brian Duffy, I don't know if you know this, but he's an Irishman from Boston. Not only an Irishman from Boston, an Irishman from South Boston. And if you know the history of Whitey Bulger, I need to say no more. To tell you that Brian grew up in a tough neighborhood would be the understatement of the day here today as a Southie. And, you know, he was a working class family, a big family, 5 children growing up in South Boston. And Brian knew his place in the family and worked very hard in school. and worked very hard at sport. You know, he grew up in the era when the Red Sox couldn't win a World Series, but my Lakers couldn't beat the Boston Celtics. So there was a marvelous time for a young man, a young boy who maybe dreamed of playing baseball and basketball and really never dreamed of flying in space. Brian said, you know, I asked him, did you always want to be an astronaut? He said, no, you know, I thought it was cool, but it's nothing I could ever do, certainly from my upbringing and my background. I asked him about joining the Air Force. How did you end up doing that? And he said, well, he had a cousin who went to the Air Force Academy, but at the end of the day, there was a lot of financial incentive to go to the Air Force Academy and the free education when you come from a family of 5 in the neighborhood that Brian grew up in. The prospect of playing baseball was also a good thing as well. And although not recruited, Brian walked on to the varsity baseball team as a freshman at the Air Force Academy and made the team. So here he was in the United States Air Force, studying mathematics, playing baseball, and kind of getting introduced to flight. In fact, his first introduction to flight was on the airline flight from Boston to Colorado Springs to attend the Air Force Academy. So he didn't go there thinking he wanted to be a pilot. He didn't know what that meant. He didn't go there thinking he wanted to be an astronaut. That was something that other people did. His sophomore year, he was offered an opportunity to try out for a professional baseball team. And thankfully, for all of us, he declined the opportunity and elected to stay at the Air Force Academy. What a different career that could have been. He majored in mathematics at the Air Force Academy, not choosing any simple subject to get through. But I think one of the important things that happened there happened on the athletic fields. And in Brian's senior year, he was elected to be captain of the Air Force Academy baseball team. Now, a lot of folks may not think that's too big a deal. I mean, every team has a captain. But when I consider the fact that my classmate, Mark Welsh, was on that team, Mark Welsh is currently a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and is the Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force, 4-star general. Being selected to be Mark's captain is a big deal. So Brian's leadership skills, he exemplified early, very early, even as a cadet at the Air Force Academy. He'll tell you he didn't have the best bat or the best arm on the team, but it's clearly he was the best leader on the team. You know, but the singular most important thing that happened to Brian at the Air Force Academy had nothing to do with academics, and it had nothing to do with baseball, and it had nothing to do with falling in love with flying. It had to do with falling in love with Janet Helms. This blind date that he got set up on for the ring dance at the Air Force Academy. Now, the ring dance, I'm told by the current cadets, is the second most coveted ticket, only behind the Academy Awards in the United States of America. Of course, those are Air Force Academy cadets that tell me this, you know, and they're trying to get as good a looking date to come to this thing as they possibly can. Jan, this was really, no kidding, a blind date for Jan because they had been set up by a friend, letters had exchanged. Jan had sent Brian a picture. Brian was smart. He did not send Jan a picture. He wanted to make sure she got on that airplane. And who was the last one off the airplane that day at the Denver airport? Coming off, seeing this young man standing there holding her photograph in hand was Jan Helms. It was instant love. In fact, Jan told me she extended her time on that stay to get to know this young man a little better. And when Brian graduated and had a chance to go to undergraduate pilot training, he didn't try to go to the nice spa location that I went to in Phoenix, Arizona. He volunteered to go to Columbus, Mississippi to be close to Jan, who was teaching school then down in Florida. And of course, that led to a wonderful marriage and a wonderful family that I think was appropriately described earlier as taking up a good number of the seats here today. And it's so wonderful to have the Duffy and Helms clan here to be part of this. Brian, I know he did great in pilot training. He was a distinguished graduate. And in 1975, when he went to pilot training, graduating the next year, the F-15 was the newest, hottest jet in the United States Air Force. And mostly only experienced people were given that airplane, except they picked a few nuggets right out of pilot training who they thought had some potential. And Brian Duffy was one of those very first second lieutenants selected by the United States Air Force to check out in the F-15. Off to Langley Air Force Base he went, and did spectacular there, was one of the bright up-and-coming stars. When out of the blue one day, someone handed him some orders that said, you were going to go to Kadena Air Base, Okinawa, Japan, and you're going to be the wing safety officer there. Now, in those days in the Air Force, the wing safety officer was kind of the kiss of death to your career. In fact, 5 guys in front of Brian had turned the assignment down and elected to get out of the Air Force. And the only reason Brian got the assignment is he still had a 3-year commitment in the Air Force and he couldn't say no. So, just being a logical guy, Brian figured, well, this is it for me. I guess I'll go to Kadena, but while I'm there, I better be thinking about my next career because clearly the Air Force has given up on me. It's where Brian and I met, and Brian became my instructor pilot. Now, I knew none of these stories, and I didn't understand what it meant to be the wing safety officer, but I understood what it meant to be a good fighter pilot, and I knew I had the best fighter pilot in the 18th TAC Fighter Wing as my instructor pilot in Brian Duffy. But I guess to put it in NASA term, being assigned to the 18th TAC Fighter Wing headquarters safety office was kind of like being assigned to Building 1 at the Johnson Space Center. It was not something you desired to do or looked forward to do. But Duff, is one of these guys that he just doesn't complain. He goes through life with a skip in his step and a smile on his face and just does his job, and just does his job better than anybody around him. And apparently he did it better than he even realized because eventually, although he thought it was the end of his career, some interesting things were happening behind the scenes. Of course, he didn't know it, so he executed his plan. He thought maybe being a test pilot would be kind of interesting duty, so he filled out an application to test pilot school. He was not selected. He was an alternate, he found out. Well, plan 2. And this is a strange one. I guess I'll go be a lawyer. I don't know, there may be a connection back to Southie there that I just haven't heard the story about, but here we got a fighter pilot, math major, wants to be a test pilot, and his bailout plan is to be a lawyer? So when he's on a temporary duty trip to the United States of America for 2 months in Maxwell Air Force Base, Alabama, he sneaks out one weekend, rents a car, drives to Auburn, takes the LSAT, and gets accepted into 2 law schools. Comes back to Okinawa. He's 2 weeks away from dropping his letter to get out of the Air Force saying, thank you very much for a wonderful career, I'm off to law school, when the wing director of operation, an infamous fighter pilot named Moody Suter, calls him into his office and says, Brian, you've done a great job as the head of flight safety here, and I want you to go to fighter weapons school and be our representative for the 18th TAC Fighter Wing. Now, this is the most plum assignment any fighter pilot could get in the United States Air Force. To go to, this is the Navy Top Gun, Fighter Weapons School, F-15, young captain. Brian says, well, sir, that's really not in my game plan. After being less than unceremoniously thrown out of Moody's office, literally thrown out of Moody's office, Brian went back and thought, what is going on here? And fortunately, before that his letter hit the desk at the Military Personnel Center, a slot opened up at Air Force Test Pilot School, and he got a cold call that said, how would you like to come out for a 5-flight eval? He said, I think I'll try that. And so instead of law school, Brian ended up off at Air Force Test Pilot School in the year of 1982. Now, of course, how did Brian do at Test Pilot School? Distinguished graduates out there, of course, and from there he moved on to Eglin Air Force Base, where he excelled as a test pilot. I followed Brian not from Kadena to Test Pilot School, and then I was assigned to Eglin and joined him down there, and I can tell you he was working on a very critical and classified program at the time that was very important to our national defense, and just doing a bang-up job. But I also remember that when he arrived down there, NASA was going to have a selection for another astronaut class, 1985. And every test pilot in the wing down there was applying to be a NASA astronaut, except one, Brian Duffy. Because he just went to test pilot school and thought that's what he was supposed to be, as a test pilot, not an astronaut. He got another phone call from another wing DO, this time a little kinder colonel who called him in and said, Brian, I understand you're not applying to to the NASA program. And Brian said, no, I don't think I'm going to. And he says, I think you should. And this time Brian did follow the advice of his colonel. He literally had filled out his application, finished filling it out on a Friday, and a dear friend of ours, Steve Patati, checked out on F4 for the weekend, flew to Randolph Air Force Base with Brian's application so that the board would have it on their desk on Monday morning. And the only test pilot from Eglin Air Force Base selected by NASA that year was Brian Duffy. So, if you're not a believer in providence, there's too many examples in this man's life where some twists and turns have moved along. But, just because the Air Force recommends you to NASA doesn't mean you're in. You got to go through the interview process and all that stuff. And there's a great story from Brian's interview that I think is also kind of captures his sense of humor and a little bit of the steel in his spine. So the story goes, Brian is sitting there at the interview table, and of course the head of the flight crew operations is chairing this, and there's different astronauts there and personnel people, and they're going around asking him various questions. And one of the questions that was asked of Brian was where he went to college. Now, of course, they know this. It's in the folder, but this is part of the game. And Brian said, well, I went to the academy. And the man at the head of the table, who was a graduate of Annapolis, said, which academy? Brian smiled and said, the academy. Well, that gentleman who was sitting at the head of the table sent me a note the other day, and I want to read it to you. It's pretty short. So first he offers his congratulations to you, Brian, and he says, however, I'm a little concerned, and this is just to point out that there's always one more chance to get even. I'm a little concerned that you are honoring an individual who has acquired a reputation for not paying off his bets. For you see, Brian has yet to pay off for his unwise wager on Air Force when they played Navy during the 2015 football season. I would also note that it has taken the Astronaut Hall of Fame a long time to honor Brian. The Irish, after all, recognized him for his contributions and his virtues some 26 years ago when they made him the 1990 Grand Marshal of Houston's St. Patrick's Day Parade. All the best, George Abbey. Brian's ASCAN years were interrupted, as the whole offices were, by the tragedy of the Challenger accident. And Brian told me, one of the neat things that he got to do and feels very connected to was the ability to participate, even as a young new guy, in return to flight. And he found himself in short order assigned to Huntsville, working on issues associated with the main engines and the solid rocket boosters. And most flattering of all, he said, was to be asked by Rick Houck, who's here today, and Dick Covey's, who's here today, to be their family escorts for the return to flight mission. For me, picking a family escort is a very, very personal moment and matter. And to know that these two gentlemen here thought so highly of Brian to do that speaks volumes of Brian Duffy. Well, Brian had some good times, too, with other additional duties in SAIL and Capcom, but there's also that time in the barrel, as the Navy folks say, and he by and by found himself back in Building 1 as both the Bubba, no good deed goes unpunished there, and the assistant director of the Johnson Space Center and the acting deputy director. I can tell you that no one in the astronaut office wanted these jobs. No one. Again, it was like being assigned to headquarters. And yet Brian saluted smartly and took them on. And I can also tell you, every one of us in the astronaut office at the time were so glad that Brian did just that, because he brought an element of sanity, we think, I'd like to think, but also perspective from the astronaut office perspective. And we knew that our voice was always going to be heard through Brian's quiet dialogue within the halls of power in Building 1. He was the right guy for the job and did it brilliantly. John has given us a great summary of Brian's flight experiences. The videos were fantastic. His first flight, he was tutored by one of the greats, Charlie Bolden, and Brian has recognized him already. On 57, he did his first rendezvous with Ron Graby and began to be schooled in that. On 72, he did another rendezvous, but I think something else stands out on that flight. It's one thing to fly with one rookie on your crew. In fact, that's kind of entertaining. Having two rookies on your crew can be pretty fun, really, because you can play them off against each other. Having three rookies on your crew, I would call challenging. Having 5 rookies on your first flight as a commander is terrifying. And that's what Brian had. Here he was, his first command flight. He had 5 rookie astronauts assigned to his flight, and his MS-2 is the only one who had flown before, and he'd only flown once. That's the kind of trust in leadership that the NASA leadership had in Brian Duffy, in his ability to do that mission, which they completed very successfully. I'll tell you, those 2 rendezvous missions, though, the skills he developed in those flights really got put to the test on his last flight, STS-92. Now, 92 was kind of an unsung flight for the International Space Station. You know, when you take up a module that you can open the hatch and go inside and there's video down to the ground, that's really palpable for the audiences to see on Earth. Or if you put up a 150-foot solar array that deploys, I mean, that is cool. But you got this little box of a truss with these black discs in it, and you can't get inside it, and what is this Z1 truss anyway? Well, it's the brain of the International Space Station. It's the nervous system. It's the entire control system that keeps it pointed in the right direction, and all the communication systems go through it. So it's an incredibly important element of the station. But Brian was happy to just, tell people, well, it's a Z1 truss and leave it at that. Proud of his mission, though, and proud of his crew. On his last training simulator before that flight, they had the opportunity to do one more run through the sim. And Brian asked the folks over at Mission Control if they could do one more radar failed rendezvous in the simulator. Now, Mission Control didn't like to do those because with the radar fail, they had no information, so it's like watching paint dry for the last 50 minutes of the rendezvous, and the crew had all the data on board and look out the window to do it. But Brian felt that he and the crew needed just a little sharpening in that area. Again, I think he was a little prescient, because sure enough, on STS-92, during the rendezvous with the International Space Station, carrying the Z1 truss and PMA-3, 2 very critical payloads, the radar failed. And Brian had to execute the first ever non-radar rendezvous in the space shuttle program. Well, they were trained, right? They had sharpened their skills just before they went up, right? So no problem. Of course, the ground is seeing nothing because the radar's turned off, but Brian's flying it, and they do their burns, and it's night, and they're coming into the portion of the rendezvous where Brian floats back to the back station on the shuttle flight deck and is looking through the optical sight out the overhead window as the sun rises, expecting to see the space station somewhere in the vicinity of the site. Not only is it nowhere in the vicinity of the site, it's not even in the window. So you imagine you're looking up there going, this isn't how it worked in the simulator. And he told me he paused for a moment thinking, where is it? And then someone said, look, and out across the payload bay, behind the tail of the shuttle, just above the OMS pods, was the space station. Now, there's no procedures to recover from this position, folks. I mean, you don't know exactly where you are at this point or your trajectory. And Brian Duffy, the best BFM pilot, basic fighter maneuver pilot I ever flew with in the F-15, put all those skills and his mathematics skills and his understanding of orbital mechanics to use at that moment. I said, what'd you do, Brian? He says, I leaned on that translational hand controller like you wouldn't believe it. He said, McDivitt may have found the McDivitt quadrant, but I was going to test it one more time. And he thrusted toward this thing. All the ground could see was the fuel going away. That's all they could see. They didn't know where the station was and the shuttle relative to it. They were just watching the gauges go down. But when the rendezvous was complete, it turned out Brian had used exactly the amount of fuel programmed because the correction he put him in a final terminal approach that required no fuel at all to complete the rendezvous. This is the kind of guy that Brian is. And the reason you've never heard that story is because Brian doesn't tell stories about himself. He's a quiet, unassuming leader who does exceptional at everything that he does. I call him an out-of-the-limelight leader, an out-of-the-limelight person who pursues excellence, an out-of-the-limelight person who does nothing but his duty, which he can never be asked to do more of, and always, always with good humor. He was late to the space business. He didn't know it was his destiny, but he woke up one day and found himself at NASA, and he never left the space business. Even after leaving NASA, he stayed actively involved in participating with Lockheed Martin and now Orbital ATK to make sure there is a future for this country in human spaceflight. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a good thing when good things happen to good people, and a good thing is happening today to Brian Duffy. It's my pleasure to present Colonel Brian Duffy for induction into the Air Force Hall of Fame. Astronaut Hall of Fame.
Wow. Chili, do you make all that stuff up? I've only had about 6 months to get ready for this today, since I found out about from a phone call from Dan before Christmas. So it was kind of the nicest Christmas present I could have received, except it came with a catch, as all things do. And Dan said, "Well, you can't tell anybody to do this." So I'm used to on space missions. Usually you train for about a year before you go fly when you're with your crew, and so I haven't had a year to do this. I'm not quite as prepared as maybe as I would be 6 months from now. So Kevin was very kind in how he characterized my growing up in my life. Thank you for doing that, Chili. That was great. I know for those of you that were at the gala last night, we talked a lot more about family there and the connection that Kevin and my families have, which is very, very strong, and it's something that we value very much, Kevin. So today is it's truly an amazing day for a young boy that's growing up, and actually the town that I grew up in is called Rockland, Massachusetts, and it's just outside of Southie. My folks are from Southie, and to get away from some of the things that Kevin insinuated, they actually moved out into the burbs in this little town of Rockland, which is pretty. It's a pretty nice place. I'll talk a little bit more about it. But growing up in that town makes this a day that I never would have dreamed could have happened here. So being here and being introduced by a friend of over 35 years, a good friend, this is a special event in my life and Jan's life here. And thank you, Kevin, for being here. Thank you for the introduction. When they asked me who would you like to introduce you, it took about about a millisecond for me to say Kevin Chilton, to do that just because of our friendship and our relationship. Thank you for what you've done, and thank you for being here. And Kathy, I know you're here. Thank you for coming too. So, but most of all, thanks for your friendship. That's what I value the most. So, it's truly a humbling experience to be there, joining my heroes. I'm looking at the front row here. These are the folks that as I was growing up, I watched do all the great things, and I kind of dreamed a little bit about what it might be like, but never thought I'd ever have the chance. But joining you is a special treat for me, and I'm really happy and proud to be joining with my mate Scott Parazynski, the fearless astronaut and mountain climber that you'll hear more about here shortly. So Scott, our congratulations to you and to your family. So. I want to thank the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation and the Selection Committee for shining this light on us and inviting us to join this incredible group. It's a genuine honor, and it's beyond a doubt the greatest recognition of my professional career. I can't imagine a better one. And in this role, I look forward to helping forward the STEM activities. You heard it mentioned already at least once, the advancement of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And I look forward to helping out in that role with joining the other astronauts and supporting the ASF. And I'd like to extend a big thank you also to Tammy and the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation, her staff that has put on not only last night's event, but has taken care of every single detail for us over the weekend, which has been absolutely fabulous. I'd like to thank Darren, who's here as well, because as has been mentioned, this venue is just awesome. What do folks think about it? Do you like this here? So every time I come here, I go up on the top there and I look, and hi folks up there, good to see you. I go up there, from right about there you can see my window there, so I always like to go up and look at my window there, which is where I looked out. But this is an amazing educational event. It's a great place to bring children to, and for all of the folks that are here that have brought children, thank you for doing that, because you never know when you bring a child to an educational venue where you might expose them to something that is going to change their life forever there. So thank you for bringing all the youngsters, the future generation. And I love the way you tell the story of space exploration here. You look backwards and you look forward as well there, and that's an important message, so that when people from all over the world come here to learn about space, which is what they do, they leave much smarter and much more knowledgeable about it because of the way that you're able to tell our story. So thank you for the way you do that. So those of you that know me, you heard Kevin talk a little bit about some baseball that I played. Those of you that know me know that I've been a lifelong baseball fan. Growing up, I was either playing it or practicing. I was in a game or practicing for a game, something I loved. As a child, I followed the Red Sox very, very carefully. Some summers I actually scored, listened on the transistor radio I had. Actually scored every single game for an entire summer there and keeping track of it all. And when the Red Sox played the Yankees, I really paid attention to it because of the rivalry that's there. So one of the most colorful characters to ever play the game was a very famous Yankee catcher named Yogi Berra. And at his 1972 induction speech at the Baseball Hall of Fame, the very first thing he said in his speech was, "I guess the first thing I should do is thank everybody who made this day necessary." Well, yeah, we lost Yogi fairly recently, but we're going to keep his quotes around because they'll last forever. I would like to do the same. I would like to thank everyone who made this day necessary. Without putting any words in Yogi's mouth, I think what he was saying was that we're all shaped by the people who touch us, and touch our lives. And certainly no one has shaped my life and touched my life more than my beautiful wife of 40 years, Jan. So she let me drag her all around the world. You heard Chili did a pretty good career synopsis there, but we moved 8 times in the first 10 years that we were married, some of it to overseas. But she let me chase my dreams to fly F-15s, which was a hoot. And then when the opportunity came up to become a space shuttle astronaut, she fully supported it. And I told a story last night about how when I got the call, I called Jan at home, and our children at the time, Sean and Shannon, were 2 and 4, and they were sitting next to Jan had them on the counter, and the phone rings, and I give her the good news, and she's all excited. She goes, she's animated, and she's going, "Daddy's going to be an astronaut, Daddy's going to be an astronaut." And the kids got excited along with her. And then after a couple of cycles of that, Sean goes, "What's an astronaut?" But with all the support I've gotten, so Jan says she was happy that I got the chance to again chase a dream and have it come true. And It was just an amazing thing to have the best seat in the house riding on a space shuttle, while she had the worst seat in the house, standing 3 miles away on the roof of the Launch Control Center, watching us leave town on 1,000 feet of fire. But thank you, honey. I can't thank you enough. Let's see, Sean and Shannon, I want to thank you as well for putting up with my absences when we were gone, and thanks for giving Mom and me the support that you did throughout the years. When it was kind of funny, we were on the bus driving out here today, and Sean and I were sitting in the back, and he goes, "You know, this is kind of different. We're driving out to the Kennedy Space Center on a bus with no threat of a launch slip." So I wasn't exactly known for going on time every time. In fact, on my last flight, we tried, my pilot is here, by the way. Pam, how many times did we try? We loaded up 3 times. Yeah. So let's just call it a handful of times that we were trying to go. It took long enough that my mother left. Now Shannon and husband Thomas, and I don't know if where they are, or if they're here. I just saw them earlier, but they've given us 3 beautiful grandchildren who are roaming around here. It's little Scarlett, little Audrey, and 10-month-old Nolan. So nothing more important to me than my family, and I can't thank you all for the support, and I love you all. So. I feel so blessed to have been born when and where I was. I was born into a large and loving family and grew up in what turned out to be a child-friendly and generous small town. My parents are no longer here, but the love and the lessons that they taught to me, my sisters, Diane and Claire, who are here, over here, my brother Tim, who's here as well, standing over there. The lessons that we learned, we still have. So while we remember Mom and Dad for everything they gave us, and we're happy for the lessons that they taught us. I learned about hard work and caring for a family by watching my dad work 2 and sometimes 3 jobs to provide the best that he could for us. My older brother Dan was a Down syndrome child and adult, and the jobs that my father was working provided Dan with the level of care that the wealthiest families in the country provided to their handicapped children. So we weren't wealthy, but we didn't know it. Didn't matter, to tell you the truth, because we were raised in a very loving environment where we had everything we needed. We didn't need anything more than that. My mom was the glue for the family, as a lot of Irish mothers are. She lovingly set down the rules and made sure that we followed them. She also encouraged us to strive to do our best with our God-given talents and abilities. So that was a lesson that we learned early in life. So thank you, Mom and Dad, for all that you did for us. Jen's family's been important to us as well, and they are here today. Her dad, Jack Helms, and Jack's sitting over here next to my brother Tim standing, and Jack and his wife Patty are here. And Jack, I can't thank you enough either. Over the years, you've given me some fabulous advice and counsel. You've helped us a lot. It's paid off, and so thank you very much. And as far as like the golf swing tips go, I need a few more, so keep them coming. My game's falling apart. Jan's sisters are here as well, Judy, Joni and Jackie, and I don't know where they're sitting, but they're nearby. So they're here. They're right in front of me. And their husbands and friends and family are all here as well. And they've been nothing but supportive to Jan and me and our family over the years, and we thank you for that. We love all you guys. So growing up in that small town of Rockland, Massachusetts was actually a pretty lucky thing, although what it meant was the space program was a long way away. It was 1,000 miles away. But the best thing that was going on in those days, the early days of the space program, was they covered those missions on television really well. So I was able to watch every launch that I could, and was very interested in what was going on. But as Kevin mentioned, I never thought I'd be a part of it. In fact, I clearly remember my first experience with space. As I was a paper boy most of my young growing up days, where I delivered daily papers there. And I remember a cold winter day, right after sunset. It was a very clear sky, and I looked up and I saw my first satellite, a polar satellite, going from north to south. From where I was standing, it was going from right to left. Big, bright, shiny object that I knew. I didn't know if it was Russian or American, but I knew it was not an airliner, and I knew it was in space because of the speed at which it was moving. And so that was the first time where seeing space and thinking, well, you can put things in space and do things with it. That was the first time it hit me as a child to do that. So I remember very clearly my first exposure. Another lucky thing about growing up in that town was that the people were really generous. In fact, they went and hired a calculus teacher to come teach the class to 3 students there at Rockland High School. How many schools would do that nowadays? So they hired a teacher to teach a course to 3 students, and I attribute that to why I majored in mathematics at the Air Force Academy, and then having majored in that subject enabled a lot of the other things that happened in my career. So if you go from A to Z, a good way to attribute that is to the people of Rockland, Massachusetts, and the fact that they were willing to do that. So I'm very thankful to the town that did that in those days. So the human space program's always been kind of on my radar. I've been watching it. Jan and I, in the summer of 1975, came over to watch the Apollo-Soyuz test project launch, and Vance was sitting right here in front of me. And we were on the causeway out here, sitting there watching, looking across the water at the Saturn vehicle that was on the pad out there. And we were wondering what was going on through your mind there as we heard the crew getting loaded in. And Jan and I talked about, what are they thinking? What are they feeling out there? Well, little did we know that years later, and not many years later, Vance and Bev would be good friends of ours, would live in the same neighborhood. Bev would be Sean's Cub Scout den mother, and their son Eric would be Sean's good buddy. So it really is a small world. I know that the successes that I was able to experience in the shuttle program would not have happened without the absolute commitment of tens of thousands of people across the country. Those people, some were in D.C. inside the Beltway, doing the things that you have to do inside the Beltway to make sure that the workforce has the resources that it needs. Some of the people were in project offices and program offices spread around the country. Some were building, flight hardware for us. Some were building payloads for us. The training crew in Houston was getting both the astronaut crew and the ops team ready to go. But at least from my perspective, all of that comes together and came together right here at the Kennedy Space Center. And by spending a lot of time here over the years, I've learned just how proud the KSC workforce was of their orbiter fleet. Also, how much of their lives they dedicated to those orbiters. And as astronauts, we actually felt that when we flew the missions, we were just being loaned the orbiters. And we were supposed to bring it back in really good shape or else. And so it was, in a way, when they let us go fly these beautiful machines, it was rather like a father letting a daughter go on a date. And, over the course of a 2-week mission, and I remember Charlie saying, okay, we're going to clean this thing up before we bring her home. Over the course of a 2-week mission, the inside of the vehicle with 7 people living in it will get a little bit dirty. There's, food particles escape sometimes, and they stick to the wall, and the occasional drop of a drink that has escaped from a straw. And then there's, every once in a while, there's a fruit punch explosion. And trying to clean up a big red mess takes a lot of towels. But usually on the day before entry, we would grab a wet towel. Everybody would take a wall or a ceiling, and we would just wipe that orbiter as clean as we could get it to try to bring it back, because the KSC folks had given us this perfect, clean, beautiful machine, and we didn't want them to think that we had really trashed it. So I'd like to thank the astronauts who went before us that set the bar so high for us to try to achieve, try to reach it, and my other shuttle colleagues for all they did, for all of their help and teaching and guidance. That you guys all set the standard for us to try to watch and learn from you. So I thank you for doing that. So for me, this is a day of thanks to all who have helped me, but it's also a promise of what's to come. I was the child of what I consider the moon generation. Many of us have and are helping lay the foundation on the trip to Mars that Charlie talked about. When I talk with youngsters, I tell them that they are part of the Mars generation. They will see it happen, and if they want, they can be a part of it. The Orion spacecraft, the vehicle that will carry the humans farther than they've ever gone before, has already had an extremely successful test flight. The second vehicle is being built right now in the Kennedy Space Center, and it will launch in about 2 years on the Space Launch System. That's going to be the nation's new heavy lift rocket, and it's going to take Orion and astronauts to where they've never been before. So we're well down the path to continuing human space exploration, and it's all going to happen right here at the Kennedy Space Center. To the scholars that are here today, and those of the future, human space exploration is alive and well, and I'd like to tell you, just follow your dreams. Maybe don't go to law school. The scholars, as was mentioned, are just an incredibly talented group, and we're actually very happy to hand the baton to you for you to carry to help make the Mars generation successful. So I guess in wrapping up here, I'd like to use one more yogiism, and he said, "The future ain't what it used to be." I agree. Things are really looking up for the space program and for our country, and I know the astronaut scholars will be among the leadership team that will take us to Mars. So thank you so much for being here today, and thank you for this great honor.
Congratulations, Brian, and welcome to the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame. I have a question now. You guys down in the front row, you heard what he said, didn't you? He said that he grew up watching and admiring you guys. What were you trying to say? Say what? What was that? Oh, that you're old. He didn't say it to those guys and ladies over there, did he? He will. I heard you say that. Our next inductee is Scott Parazynski.
Ignition and liftoff of Atlantis on a mission to study planet Earth.
Did a great job with the deployment.
And liftoff of the Space Shuttle Atlantis.
Here we go.
Scott Parazynski deploying the hand controller for the safer.
Booster ignition and liftoff of Discovery with a crew of 6 astronaut heroes and 1 American legend.
Houston Discovery got a good grapple of Spartan.
Copy that. Great job, Steve.
And liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour.
Booster ignition and liftoff of Discovery.
Luke, I'm your father. Use the Force, Luke. That's music for my son, Luke, and be thinking about him today.
2 deployed to 3.
Yay!
Main gear touchdown. Nose gear touchdown.
Dr. Scott Parazynski was selected as a NASA astronaut in March 1992 and was qualified as a mission specialist after training. He's a veteran of 5 space flights and racked up nearly 1,400 hours in space. He spent 47 of those hours working outside the spacecraft during 7 spacewalks. Parazynski's first flight was STS-66 aboard Space Shuttle Atlantis. Launched November 3, 1994, the flight included the Atlas III payload to further study the interaction between Earth and the Sun, as well as the Space Lab pallet. He flew aboard Atlantis again on STS-86 in September of 1997. The mission marked the 7th docking with the Russian space station Mir. Parazynski served as the flight engineer on that mission, as well as the navigator during the Mir rendezvous, and participated in the first U.S. and Russian spacewalk during a shuttle mission. Next, Parazynski flew on STS-95 in October of 1998 alongside an American icon, John Glenn. As flight engineer, Parazynski operated the shuttle's robotic arm and monitored several life science investigations, including those involving his famous crewmate. He returned to space on STS-100 in April of 2001, this time aboard Space Shuttle Endeavour. Parazynski took part in 2 spacewalks, playing a key role in the configuration of the space station's robotic arm, Canadarm2. On his final shuttle flight, STS-120, Parazynski ventured outside the shuttle space station complex 4 times, including an ambitious unplanned spacewalk to inspect and repair the station's P6 solar array. Parazynski retired from NASA in March of 1999, not just to work in private industry, but to pursue other exploration goals. He summited Mount Everest in May of 2009 and became the first person to both orbit the world and stand on top of it. Ladies and gentlemen, astronaut Scott Parazynski. To present Scott Parazynski for induction into the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame, please welcome Hall of Fame astronaut Kent Rominger. Kent?
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here today with two of my favorite people on the planet on the stage with me. And before I get started, I just want to acknowledge Scott's family that's here. I've gotten to spend some time with him, his mother and father, this weekend. It's been very special. It now helps put things in perspective kind of on why Scott the way he is, and we'll get into that. But his beautiful, talented wife, Minnie, and then Luke, the Skywalker, his son, is here as well. And by the way, the last time I saw Luke, well, he was 3.5 years old and about this tall. And today he's taller than Scott. But I first met Scott in 1992. We both showed up at NASA, a class of 25 astronaut candidates. And immediately, when you show up in the class, you start looking around, you get to meet people, you make first impressions. And my first impression with Scott was, wow, this guy is driven, capable, hardworking, very intelligent. You know what? He's the all-American golden boy, whiz kid. And so the key word there is boy, right? Because although he was 32, he looked like he was half that age, barely a teenager. And so to also know that he was a doctor, and being a Navy fighter pilot, we figure out how to pick on people. I immediately dawned on me. There was a TV show in the 80s, Doogie Howser, MD. So immediately, Scott became Doogie Howser, and that was I was very proud of that. Especially when it turned out, because he hadn't been around a lot of fighter pilots yet in his career, he didn't know how to take this, being called Doogie Howser. And people started shortening it to Doogie. It was just a little bit easier to say. And the fact he was unsure, and I don't think really particularly like it, it stuck. And, very well. Yes. And so in our class, he became Doogie. And I mentioned All-American. But if you learn a little bit more about his background, when he was 11, his father worked for Boeing, decided to travel the world, compliments of Boeing. So Scott, from the time he was 11 until he came back to the U.S. to go to college, went to school in Dakar, Senegal, Beirut, Lebanon, Athens, Greece, and Tehran, Iran. And then he came back and got accepted into Stanford. And I'm thinking, now how does that happen? Think about it. You just, middle school through high school, you went to school in all these places. Stanford's kind of tough to get into to begin with, much less coming out of the schools halfway around the world that Scott did. So right away, knew there was something very, very special with Scott. Well, so we came in 92. The way it works at NASA as an astronaut candidate, you have 1 full year of generic astronaut training, which is actually a lot of fun. You get to know each other, you tour the centers, but you get to learn about the space shuttle. So you come out of this year qualified on the space shuttle, and then you're hoping to get assigned to a flight. It takes a year of training before you actually get to fly on that flight. Well, by the time we finished our year of candidacy, Doogie was assigned to space flight. And it's no surprise at all that, so in 1994, he flew his first flight, only 2 years, only 1 year after he'd gotten there as a class. And so that is very telling. The other thing you're going to come to know and love about Doogie is there is no opportunity, particularly if it's an adventure, that he is going to pass up.
Correct.
If there is an opportunity, his arm is higher than everybody's, he's the first of the line, and he is there. Well, in 1993, the International Space Station came along, and we immediately started working with the Russians, the Soviet Mir program, and flying U.S. astronauts long duration on Space Station Mir. Well, guess who's at the front of that line? Yes, it was Doogie. He's at the front of that line, goes over to Russia, spends 5 months in, I'm not sure why it took the Russians 5 months, but they figured out, he's a little too tall. He does not fit in the Soyuz capsule. So he got sent home, and I was a little disappointed because now he had another call sign that kind of was sticking more than Doogie. So now he became too tall. And so he came back, and it actually, in my mind, was a real blessing. He came back and flourished, started flying the space shuttle. You saw here from the flights, and they mentioned, I don't know if you picked it up, but he flew as the mission specialist to the flight engineer, so very involved with the crew, safely getting the space shuttle into orbit and back home from orbit. But on STS-100, I had the pleasure of getting to fly with Scott. And one of the roles of the commander, of which I was the commander, is you assign the duties to the crew. And so on my crew, we had 3 rookies, and so as Chile describes it, hey, there's a handful of work there in the rookies. But the 4 I had that had flown were all very experienced, gifted astronauts, of which Scott absolutely was one of those. And as the commander, I decided, well, my 3 rookies, I need to give them the best experience they can have so that they can bring that back to NASA. Part of that experience is flying on the flight deck. So you have the pilot and the commander take up 2 of the seats. Those are not for barter. But then you have the flight engineer and the mission specialist 1 seat. So I have 2 seats, 3 rookies. I go, okay, one of them will be the mission specialist 2. The other 2 rookies will split the other seat. One of them gets to fly it up, the other gets to fly them down. Everybody gets to see what it's like being on the flight deck from the shuttle, except for 1. Out of a crew of 7, 1 is going to get the special job of being on the middeck the entire time. And as I thought through it, it was Doogie. And I'm thinking, wow.
Too tall.
How too tall? Yeah. Oh, thank you, Doogie. So I thought, Doogie, who, by the way, has been a mission specialist too on 2 of his flights, which is a very demanding role. He not only was the flight engineer on previous flights, he did that and did spacewalk. Typically, you don't do that to a crew because the training is intense on both of those, and you'll split those duties among other mission specialists. When I sat down with Scott to say, hey, here's what I've got in mind for you to do on the crew, I was actually kind of worried because here, my guess is it was the first time in his life somebody was sitting him down and going, I'm giving you a bad deal, and even though you're really talented, we're not going to capitalize on your strengths on this. So we sat down. I went through my logic with Doogie. Here's why we're going to do this. And he said, okay, and we left. This was in the afternoon. And the next morning, come back in. Doogie's in the office. And he said, hey, Rommel. By the way, my nickname's Rommel. Rommel, can we talk about those crew assignments? And I said, sure. And at the time I was saying sure, I was thinking, oh boy, here we go, right? And we sat down, and he pulled out a couple pieces of paper, these multicolored, faceted printouts that were really thorough. And they had to do with what you do when you first get onto orbit, post-insertion, and then what you do when you first come home, deorbit prep. Both very, very difficult tasks to do well. Both, if you don't do them right, the whole crew gets behind, and that day becomes a nightmare. And both very undesirable tasks, right? Nobody wants to lead those missions. But Doogie had thought about it because he was on the middeck, both going and coming. He approached me and said, hey, look at this. Look at these plans that I can do for us if I run post-insertion and if I run deorbit prep. What do you think? And I was elated. I go, I love it. And he said, hey, and by the way, do you think I could be the middeck commander? And I said, absolutely. So here I was afraid that I was going to offend Doogie. No. He's an opportunist. He says, hey, here's an opportunity for me to A, be a middeck commander, not sure we've had one of those before, and B, do it really well. Well, I don't know if you're starting to get the picture of the trend here, but Scott, he does. He wants to do everything. He's always first in line. He's very adventurous, but he's committed. Right? A lot of people want to do everything, and hey, there's no way they can come close to doing it. Scott, when he tells you he's going to do something, he is 100% committed. He is all in. And let's look back in his history to look for some examples of this. And I'm going back before I knew him. And by the way, if you go through his bio, online bios, everything he's done, it's exhausting. I get exhausted just reading through this going, wow, right? Because I know him and I know how much energy he puts into everything. But he was a Rhodes Scholars finalist. He received academic awards in every school he was ever in. And by the way, those schools include Stanford, Harvard medical schools. He's a pilot. I'm a professional pilot, but now Doogie, he decided he was going to be a pilot, so not just a private pilot, commercial pilot, instrument-rated pilot, multi-engine pilot, seaplane-rated pilot. Yeah, so you're getting the picture here. Scuba diver. So he wanted to scuba dive from the time he was young. This is one area where his parents held him back. I believe, were you in Dakar at the time?
Yes.
And the bay in Dakar is not very clean water. Matter of fact, that's code for the sewer in that part of the world. And so he was, pestering his folks, hey, please let me scuba dive. And they're like, no, we're not letting you spend that much time in that water. That is not safe. But later they found themselves in Athens. So he makes another run on his folks. Please, please, please. He found this scuba diving course. That's the good news. The bad news is it was like 2 hours away. Logistically, a nightmare for his folks to figure out how to get him, who wasn't a driving jet, to and from there to scuba dive. And so his mother said, well, Scott, I tell you what, if you can find 3 other friends and their parents agree to share in the logistics, so we split this up on how we get you to your scuba diving class and get you back, then okay. He shot out the door. That afternoon, he showed back up with 3 guys standing there saying, yes, we'll do it. Our parents will do it. 2 of the students his parents had never seen before. They weren't sure Scott had either. But yes, very innovative and driven when he wants to accomplish something. There are many Eagle Scouts in the astronaut corps, which is a very impressive thing. But I don't know how many have gotten the Outstanding Eagle Award, but you're looking at one here. Another thing that's pretty cool about Scott is he's a top 10 competitor in the 1988 U.S. Olympic luge trials. And you're thinking, wow, top 10 in the world, Olympian. And now keep in mind, he's going to school in Stanford, and I'm trying to think, there aren't that many luge tracks that close to Palo Alto, California. So in figuring out how to make this work, Scott figured out, I'm just going to have to take winter semester off, find a track somewhere to practice my luge. Turns out those happen to be in Europe, then Yugoslavia and Germany, I believe, were the tracks. To follow that passion and endeavor and wind up being world class. As well as you might imagine, he's won multiple awards and medals from NASA for his stellar performance that he's always done on his flights, including the space shuttle missions and the EVAs, including the one unplanned EVA that was very risky to repair a torn solar array. And you have to be really careful with the amount of voltage and wattage, amperage that are in those arrays. If you do the wrong thing, it's a bad day. And bad day is code for you're not going to be around anymore. So as we look at Doogie Howser, Too Tall, Scott Parazynski here, how would we classify him? Thrill seeker? Well, although he's done a lot of thrilling things, probably not. There are some that are adrenaline junkies. Unfortunately, I fall into that category that would maybe be closer to that. But thrill seeker, no. I would not classify Scott as a thrill seeker. Risk taker. Well, he has done a lot of risky things, but he's not really a risk taker. He mitigates those risks and plans them thoroughly and executes them so they're no more risky than absolutely possible. Adventure seeker? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, number one. I've never seen a more vigorous adventure seeker than Scott Parazynski. And so when I look at him, amongst all the astronauts I've been around, he truly represents an explorer. Space explorer, yes, he's done a lot of that with his 5 missions. Mountaineering, we've heard something about mountaineering. The other thing that I'm sure is not a coincidence, when he did his residency, he wound up doing it in Colorado. at University Hospital. I think the fact there are 59 14,000-foot peaks, mountains in the state of Colorado had something to do with that. He set his goal on climbing every one of them. He did. That's impressive. Mount Everest, I mean, I'm so proud when I talk about Scott, when I'm talking about our mission. You know, he is the only human on the planet that's done both, as John articulately says, has seen the world from orbit and stood on top of it. But it doesn't end there. He's spent time in Antarctica. He's applied his medical skills there. He's been to the South Pole. And interestingly, this week, this had nothing to do with this event coming up. I'm going through my news on my computer, and here something pops up, Project Poseidon, record-breaking 100-day undersea expedition. Guess who's one of their aquanauts? Scott Parazynski. So you name it. He's been a lot closer to volcanoes than I ever want to be. He is absolutely an explorer. And but one of the things that I'm most impressed with Scott is he applies himself. But even Scott realizes, hey, there are only so many hours in the day. Even Scott, the ultimate Energizer Bunny, only has so much energy. So he actually is fairly calculating on how he's going to apply himself. And we've heard a lot about the great accomplishments. What you haven't heard about is he does phenomenal things. You know, one of the things he does, and I'm looking at this Forever Remembered, if you get a chance, it's a phenomenal display to honor our Challenger crew and our Columbia crew. Scott has been very, very involved in both those crews after the fact. And one of those areas was on STS-107, after we lost that crew of Columbia, and obviously Columbia. Because of his mountaineering skills, Scott was instrumental in getting a peak. One of the 14,000 footers, Kit Carson, has 2 sub-peaks. One was already named Challenger Point in honor of the Challenger crew. Scott worked to get the other sub-peak designated Columbia Point for this. Not only did he do that, did everything, got it benchmarked, he arranged and organized, orchestrated getting the families, all the families, to Columbia. And in addition, we had a 4 F-16 flyby to commemorate that dedication. And so he put a huge amount of work and energy into something that he believed in. And thank you, Scott. That was huge. I mentioned Challenger. This is another area where Scott Parazynski obviously decided, you know, this is an area where maybe I can help. He was asked to be on the Challenger Center Board of Directors, and as most enterprises go through cycles, ups and downs, Challenger, by the way, is a phenomenal organization. It was started only 3 months after we lost Space Shuttle Challenger and her crew, and June Scobie Rogers started that organization. It's phenomenal. There are over 40 Challenger centers around the nation. 3 of them are international, and they're growing. But a half a dozen years ago, we weren't growing in Challenger Center. A couple of key board members stepped up and turned that around. One was Bill Reedy, but the other one, very instrumental, was Scott Parazynski. Scott became the chairman of the board and put a huge amount of energy. It was almost a full-time job to wind up turning around Challenger Center, and we all benefit today because that organization is very healthy and on the right upward ramp. And Scott, thank you for that. You know, when you stand up here, you always try to tell stories that are funny. Typically, that's code for something embarrassing for the astronauts sitting up here. But, so I started thinking about it, and I'm stumped. So I reached out to a friend of ours that Scott and I flew with on STS-100, Jeff Ashby, fun guy. And so call sign Bones. I said, Bones, do you have any dirt on Too Tall? Or should I call you Doogie? I forget which one you like. Call me Doogie if you like. Okay. And Ashby goes, well, you know, he goes, I actually do talk about Too Tall in some of my presentations. And Jeff said, I went to a school, middle school, talked to the students, and before I went, the teacher tasked the students. Okay, student, your job is on the day Jeff comes to speak to you about his astronaut career, you write down what it is you most are looking forward to learning from astronaut Captain Jeff Ashby about flying in space. One of the students wrote, nothing, because I'm a pen pal with astronaut Dr. Scott Parazynski. You know, I can go on and on with stories. In true Parazynski style, one last story is my mother was sick, and she had had a grand mal seizure. And coming out of the seizure, she was confused. She didn't even recognize me. It was shortly after one of my flights. I grew up in rural Colorado. I get in there quick, and Mom doesn't hardly know who I am. And it's a very small town, 1,400 people. I'm talking to the doctor, and I said, well, shouldn't we try to get my mother to Denver, to hospitals where we can run more tests? And the doc's like, no, you know, it's okay. She's improving. We drew some blood. I'm thinking, well, this doesn't sound right. I call Scott and say, hey, Scott, here's what's going on. What do you think? He says, do you have that doctor's phone number? I said, I do. And by the way, I'd been pushing on this doc several different times where I felt like, I'm sure he thought I was being pretty obnoxious, right? I was even throwing the astronaut card down. Hey, I'm an astronaut, yeah, you know, to no avail. I give Scott the phone call, and I'm sitting in the room. Man, all of a sudden, it was like a code blue in the hospital. People come running in. They go, hey, your mother's being life flighted out of here. You get this. We got to get her to the airport. And I was like, wow, right? The doctor, for me, wouldn't do anything. Whatever it is Scott did, thank you. And I don't know that we really needed a life flighter to Denver. So, but by the time she got there, she was actually back to being pretty coherent, knew who I was. You know. But by God, we got her there. So, no, you know what? It really is an honor for me today to be on the stage with both these guys. Brian Duffy, too, one of my favorite guys. And Chili mentioned it, but there was no secret. Duff is an extremely gifted fighter pilot. I did have to tell you a little bit of a story, though. Kevin Chilton kind of set the standard here. You know, when we launch from Florida, they want you to come back to Florida unless they're going to rework the vehicle. But in Chili's case, he launched from Florida. He didn't come back to Florida, right? He diverted into California. It's kind of where the Air Force Test Pilot School is. I always wondered. But then we went from STS-76 to STS-92, you know, years without messing that up. I happened to be flying the landing weather at Edwards, and when STS-92 was up, Duff followed suit. He was the only one other than Chili from STS-76 to 92 that messed that up. He couldn't come back into Florida. He went back into California. But actually, I'm really honored to be on stage with both you guys. This is really good. You know, in summary, talking about Scott, extremely capable, intelligent, driven, caring. He's a very caring individual, but he is truly an explorer at heart. He's trying to do his part to make this planet a better place for all of us. And I can't think of anyone more deserving than Dr. Scott Doogie Howser, too tall, Parazynski, to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. Congratulations.
Wow, this is certainly one of the most exciting and proudest days of my life, and I'm just so thrilled to have so many of you close friends and co-workers from the many chapters of my life here to share in this extraordinary day. And it was really fantastic to be on stage here with Brian, who's been a close friend, but also kind of a role model. He's one of those exceptional leaders that everyone in the office looked up to, and so it was really exciting for me to get the nod with Brian. And like you started out saying, it was really the most incredible call of my life, I think, to get that surprise call on Christmas Eve and be told that I was going to be here for this great induction. So wonderful to be part of the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation family and to be inducted with all these great legends. And I just have to say, Rommel, that was, 95% of what you said there, you really tugged at my heartstrings. I'm going to get back to that last 5% in here in just a minute, but you've been a very good friend for the whole, from almost day one. We really clicked as a class and as personal friends. You were a classmate, a friend. You were my fearless commander on STS-100, and I was part of his very fearful crew. And the stories that I could tell about Rommel, I mean, we'd be here well into the evening, and I wouldn't even have to embellish very much to make them sound unbelievable, and you know that's right. But I think what I admire the most about Rommel is his leadership. I think he's the most extraordinary leader that I have ever known, and I've taken so many lessons into my own personal life and my leadership style, just watching his grace and command under pressure. He was the chief of the astronaut office during our darkest hours, during the aftermath of the Space Shuttle Columbia tragedy, and our whole agency, our whole nation, the whole world needed to heal. And his steady hand, the way he managed expectations, his resolve, really carried all of us forward. I was a family escort and a casualty, basically an escort for my good friend Rick Husband in the aftermath of that terrible tragedy, and they were very difficult days for all of us. But I think it galvanized the whole agency to figure out what had happened and make sure that it could never happen again. But oh, by the way, since it's NASA, we have to develop tools and techniques to make sure that if it did happen, just in case, we would have a fighting chance to do that. And so I was part of a team to help develop tools and techniques to repair shuttles on orbit and help us have a fighting chance to come home, and should that ever happen in the future. But there are so many wonderful stories of how people came together in that very trying time. But I don't want to have all my commentary be on that note, and so I want to get back to that 5%. And let's talk about Doogie for a little bit, okay? So first of all, there's so many emotions that flood through you as you stand here on a day like today. I'm standing in front of men and women who have been my inspiration, since I was a little kid. And I'm looking at you young shuttle folks too, okay, just so you know that. It was a really interesting time when I first arrived at NASA. I think Rommel was a little bit generous in terms of my appearance when I first got here. I think I actually looked about 12 when I first arrived at NASA, but only if I hadn't shaved for like 3 weeks. If I was clean shaven, I was a 6'3" kindergartner. This is really what I was dealing with. And so I could only imagine the conversations in the corner office where Dan sat at the time, where they're making those coveted flight crew assignments. Hey, what do you think about that Parazynski kid? He seems pretty sharp. Nah, stick him back in the incubator. That was the imaginary voices in my head, thinking that there's no way that they're going to take me seriously, give me a flight assignment. But actually, it turned out to be quite a great motivator for me to be as well prepared as I could possibly be going into my simulations, and things turned out okay for me, I guess. But in any event, my very clever classmate Rommel came up with the name, yes, Doogie Howser, MD, after Neil Patrick Harris's character on the named TV show, or NPH from Harold and Kumar. Any Harold and Kumar fans here? 2 of you, that's it? Oh, come on, need to get out more. But in any event, it was really interesting when folks would come up to greet me. They'd say, "Hey, Doogie, how's it going, man?" And there was a 3-second delay. 1001, 1002, 1003. What? That was very loud. Sorry. So, as you might imagine, I didn't disguise my disdain for this call sign very well, and it immediately stuck. And so, this is a teaching moment. There are a lot of young people here, a lot of future astronauts, our astronaut scholars. I hope we'll follow in the footsteps of Christina Koch, who spoke beautifully last night. But what you need to do, if you suddenly find yourself plunked down in the middle of a military aviation squadron, which is basically the astronaut office, what you need to do when they give you that first call sign, which I guarantee you'll hate, is pretend that you love it. Put it on your business card, put it on the sign outside your door, refer to yourself in the third person as the Dukester, whatever it takes to make sure that people understand that you want that on your tombstone. And if you do that, I guarantee you'll get another call sign. Okay, so in any event, for those of you who know me very well, and I have a huge gathering of folks here. I mean, it's amazing. People from all over the world have converged on the Kennedy Space Center here, and it means the world to me to have you here. Family, friends, coworkers. I have many, many crewmates that I'm going to brag about, and flight controllers that I'm going to brag about, NBL divers that I'm going to brag about, that are here or are here in spirit. And so, for those of you who know me really, really well, you know that I actively seek to avoid the spotlight. I would much rather talk about you. I can talk your ears off about my kids, technology, politics, the weather. I'll even talk about the Kardashians, you know, whatever it takes. But I recognize that here and now today, the spotlight is beating down on my good friend and very deserving friend, Brian Duffy's highly reflective forehead, and also mine. Sorry. And so, sorry. No, I'm not. Okay. I had a shot and I had to take it. So, but I'm so deeply honored and humbled to be here today, just standing in front of you, to receive this great recognition, not as an individual, but on behalf of literally the thousands of people. Sorry. Getting choked up. Literally the thousands of people who've touched my professional career. Brilliant, resourceful, creative, passionate people. Professionals, NASA contractor, women and men, American and international partner, who prepared our spacecraft, prepared our payloads, trained us for audacious missions up into space, launched us here from the Kennedy Space Center, operated those missions, led those missions from the Mission Control Center in Houston, and then safely brought us back to planet Earth. And you know, what an incredible charmed life I've lived, to have this opportunity to live out my boyhood dreams. It's really quite extraordinary to be an American, to be able to grow up in an environment where your country dreams big, but then has the resolve to fulfill those challenges. And I like Brian and others have said, I think the future is indeed extremely bright, and you know, for the young people, your future in space is extraordinary as well. So you know, I've worked with so many extraordinary people, flight directors, many fellow crew members are here today, including members of the Hall of Fame. But I have my commander for my last mission, Pam Malroy, in the back, a wonderful leader, and she trained underneath none other than Brian Duffy, and the skill set passed directly to you. It was amazing, and I understand it. Your skill set transitioned from Charlie Bolden, so there's the lineage. Dan Taney was on our crew as well. Did a spacewalk with him on my last flight, STS-120, and he was our robotics guru along with Stephanie Wilson. And then my very good friend, one of my best friends in the known universe, Doug Wheelock, is here. And I just think the world of him, and I'm going to brag about these guys a little bit later in my commentary. And then we have Dina Contella, who is our lead EVA flight controller. She's in the back, she's hiding, but I'm going to have her stand up later. She's very shy, not really, but I'm going to brag about her as well. And I think I have some of my NBL dive team buddies here who, in all the spacewalks that I did 7 trips outside. I always felt like they were right over my shoulder, there to help me, help guide me, coax that last bolt in, hand me the tool that I'm going to need next, make me think through the next procedure. And so I want to salute those guys especially. I think I need to embarrass my home team, who are right over here in the 3rd row. And I'll start with my folks, because my dad is at the edge there, and my mom, Ed and Linda Parazynski. I embarrassed them a little bit last night. We're at the Saturn V Center. It was really a poignant place to talk about the impact that they had in my life. They're very adventurous folks as well. It didn't fall far from the tree, but they traveled extensively even before I was born. I think I took my first flight when my mom was 6 months pregnant. They went to South America, and so I actually logged some hours even before being born. But had a travel bug and a sense of curiosity about the world, and never any hard limits on what I could try and challenge myself. They might have asked questions and tried to steer me in other more safe directions, but they never held me back. And so I certainly attribute a lot of what became of my life to my wonderful parents. And so underneath the Saturn V last night, it was really kind of neat. So this is the largest rocket ever built up to this point. And at the very tail end of that ship are 5 F1 engines that propelled that Saturn V stack off to the moon. And my dad was an engineer on the program and did a lot of work in the design and test of that vehicle. So it was really special to be there. My son Luke is here as well, and I try not to embarrass him. It's pretty easy to do, but he's a fantastic kid. He just finished his freshman year at Baylor, a real scholar, but he's also very social. He's a wonderful, empathetic person. He's a great big brother to his sister Jenna, and can't say enough wonderful things about the young man that he's becoming. So, I love you. And I did not bring my younger daughter, Jenna, with me. She's 16, but she is autistic, and quite honestly, you guys are a little bit too rowdy. I think the noise in this room, this cavernous room, would be a little bit distracting to her, but she stayed home, but she's certainly the apple of my eye, and a wonderful gift in our lives. And then finally, the love of my life, Minnie Wadwa, is with me here today. She's breathtakingly beautiful. She's brilliant. She's one of the world's leaders in her field. But she's also just the most wonderful, loving, passionate person I've ever met. And I can't imagine going through this life without Minnie with me. So. So as I was starting to say a little bit earlier, I was very fortunate to work with some of the world's best and brightest on my 5 space shuttle missions, and I wish I could brag on every single one of the people that I worked with, but obviously we don't have time to do that here today. But space exploration is very much a team sport, and NASA is a champion. It's just remarkable what this organization does, and I feel so gifted to have been a part of the grander vision. The common denominator at NASA, in my mind, is a shared sense of a higher purpose, working to explore for the betterment of humanity. So I'll just very briefly talk about some of my flight history, but I was very lucky to fly with Ellen Ochoa, who I believe is there's Ellen here. Yeah, so on my first flight, I flew with 2 rookies. We had 3 rookies on that lucky flight, STS-66, and actually Ellen was my mentor on that flight. She was the veteran astronaut mission specialist who had done a similar flight on her first mission, and I continue to learn from her today. She's just an amazing person. When I got back from that flight, it was such an overwhelming, exciting experience. The first thing I wanted to do is, get back in line and go again. And so they were actually looking for volunteers to go to the Russian space station Mir, and there didn't seem to be all that many volunteers for poor Hoot. And so I went over to the Hoot's office and said, "Hey, coach, put me in." And he was very excited to get me in training for a couple of reasons, I think. One is because I'm a big goon. And so being a big goon, I was sort of a test case for what we could fit into the Soyuz capsule in the future. We needed to use that spacecraft to evacuate the International Space Station once we started to build it in a few years hence. And so I was sort of a test case. And as Rommel talked about, I turned out to fail that test. And I got a better call sign, Too Tall Parazynski, which I still try and hold on to. But you know what's interesting now, Rommel? I actually really like people calling me Doogie right now. I can't pull it off quite as well. I got a little bit of gray going on here, but it's still, every once in a while, people do come up to me and call me Doogie, and you can call me Doogie if you would like. anytime. But in any event, I ended up returning to planet Earth after a great mission on STS-86 with Wex. Wex is my commander, and did an incredible 5-day dock mission to the Russian space station Mir. I went out with one of the most experienced cosmonauts in the world, Volodya Titov. He was the very first human to spend a consecutive year off of the planet. And I got a chance to lead a spacewalk with him on his space stations, which I thought was really extraordinary. Soon after landing, actually, I was at a Monday morning meeting, I think, and the head of the office, I think it was Ken Cockrell, Taco at the time, he said, hey, Doogie, no, I think he might have called me Too Tall at that point. Hey, Too Tall, can you stop by my office after the meeting? And I thought, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. You know, I just landed from STS-86 a couple of months ago, or thereabouts, and I'm getting called into the principal's office. Not a good sign. You know, I was thinking to myself, okay, what did I do now? But as I walked in, he said, hey, how'd you like to go fly with Senator John Glenn? And my jaw dropped, you know, thinking, my God, I'm going to get a chance to fly with my boyhood hero. And it was such an extraordinary experience to fly with not just a legend, but a great human being. And to get to know his wife, Annie, and the rest of his family. What an extraordinary life experience. And I just one story from that time, but I remember when he walked into our crew office the very first day, he said, if any of you guys even think about calling me Senator Glenn, I'm going to ignore you. I'm just payload specialist number 2, or you can call me John, but nothing else. And he insisted on just being one of the guys, even though we were, you know, obviously in reverence to him. It was sort of what we would call a high pucker factor assignment for me, because, you know, I was the flight surgeon, the guy responsible for taking care of John on the flight, and if something happened to 77-year-old American hero legend John Glenn, I might as well not come back home. So, but things went great. He was in super shape, and we had an amazing mission. Then I got to fly with Rommel here, and my buddy Chris Hadfield and Jeff Ashby, and we just had a great crew, great camaraderie, jokes all the time, but when it really counted, we got the work done. And I told a story, a fun story last night from that mission, but our lives changed forever with the loss of our Columbia crew on STS-107, of course. Rick, Willie, Dave, Kulpna, Mike, Laurel, and Elon. I can't ever forget their brave sacrifice. And we can't ever take spaceflight for granted. You know, it still takes a lot of force to break the surly bonds of Earth and to get up into space. So even though we're at this new forefront of commercial spaceflight, and we're going to see greater frequency of spaceflight operations, we can't ever let our guard down. This is an industry that does not allow for any error. So at that point, I honestly, when we lost the crew, I honestly considered hanging up my spacesuit. You know, I had 2 wonderful kids at home, and I didn't know if it was right for me to continue taking those risks, but being as close as I was to that crew, and with the energy that was building around the agency, it was just NASA's at its finest. The whole agency came together to develop methods and procedures to get us back to flight as quickly as we could, and I had the great opportunity to fly one more time. But I would just say that, when the chips are down, NASA rises to the occasion. And soon thereafter, I was assigned to what I would consider my most amazing flight experience, and just an extraordinary crew led by Pambo, STS-120. And it was an extremely complex space station assembly flight. We had to install a new module called Harmony. It was an interconnecting node that had these different serial radial ports that would allow us to plug in European and Japanese modules. And then we had to relocate this P6 truss, a solar array truss, from the top of the space station and plug it in at the very tip of the space station using robotics and lots of spacewalking, and then extend these solar panels so that we could power those European and Japanese modules in the future. And it was really a spacewalker's dream to be assigned to that flight and also to be on our crew. We had a wonderful crew led by Pambo, but George Zamka was our pilot, Pambo and Zambo, so we became the Rambonauts. of course, and I became Longbow. I got another call sign out of that mix, which is great. Wheels got a Flambeau because of his pyrotechnic skills. And then we had Dan Tani, who became Boichi, and Stephanie Wilson, who was our flight engineer and robotics guru. She became Robo. And then Paolo Nespoli, who was kind of a jack of all trades, and then also the EVA quarterback. We didn't really have a cool bow name for him, so he became the Italian Stallion, for the same theme. But in any event, I just wanted to talk briefly about the solar array repair that we did, which I consider to be among NASA's finest hours. NASA's had so many incredible wins overcoming adversity, but this certainly has to be one of the most extraordinary things that NASA's ever done, and certainly in the shuttle station era. But as this solar panel was being extended out at the very tip of the space station, this guide wire that had become frayed began to rip apart the panel in a couple of spots. And so the crew, actually inside it was Pambo and our space station commander, Peggy Whitson, were hawking this very closely. They didn't have the greatest camera views, but they saw that something was wrong. The dynamics were all wrong. They stopped it immediately. And we had a big problem on our hands. We have basically a limp noodle out there. And what do you do? We couldn't retract it at that point. We couldn't extend it. And we didn't even have really good visibility to what the problem was. And what I love about NASA is when the chips are at their lowest, they regroup, they get their best and brightest together around the table, and they come up with a brilliant plan, and that's exactly what they did. People worked around the clock for 72 hours. I'm sure lots of pizza and caffeine were involved, but working around the clock developed an extraordinary, multifaceted approach to get a spacewalker out to the very tip of the space station further than were ever meant to go, using tools that had never been built before, using a cobbled together robotic system that was never imagined before. And Wheels and myself went out and did something that we didn't really know if we were going to be successful at. But we knew that Dina and Derek Hossman, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, he was our lead ISS flight director. He was going to come, but he had a conflict at the last minute. But other people like Sarmad Aziz and others that I'm going to mention in a second, were right there looking over our shoulders. And we felt confident that if we didn't fix the problem that day, there would be a plan B or there would be a plan C, and we would get to that as well. But it all worked extremely well, and I'm so proud to have been a part of that. And so one of the things I like to do, if you can indulge me, is I'd like to just mention some names of people that really contributed to this. Some are well-known names. Many have probably never been uttered in public before. Certainly all these people are unsung heroes for this effort, but I just wanted to mention them because they've done extraordinary work. First off, I want to mention the late, great Kevin Pear, who passed very shortly after STS-120, but he was kind of the godfather of the cufflink that was actually the technique that we used to repair the solar panel. And I had the great good fortune to go to his home right after the mission. I presented him the astronaut's highest award, the Silver Snoopy, along with the whole solar array team and the whole STS-120 team. And it was just a great celebration of his life, and it's such a great moment for all of us to share with him. Other members that I'm just going to run through their names again, but Derek Hossman, Dina Catella, Sarmad Aziz, Allison Chica Bollinger, my crew, of course, Pam Melroy, George Zamka, Doug Wheelock, Dan Tani, Stephanie Wilson, Paolo Nespoli, Peggy Whitson, and then we also had Clay Anderson and Yuri Malenchenko, who were basically tending the shop and the rest of the station while all this work was taking place. John Ray, Glenda Laws, Mike Steele, Andrew Clem, Dina Smith, Robert Pickle, Vincent LaCourte, Kauser Imtiaz, Dave McCann, Scott Keepers, and then the whole NBL dive team. I think I see Sherwin Wade right up here in the front, a great friend, and many others. And then we had our Capcoms and other astronauts that were supporting this effort, Steve Swanson, Kevin Ford, and Joe Tanner. And then finally, the VR lab, Dave Homan and Evelyn Morales. So if you wouldn't mind, can we just give those guys a salute? I really appreciate that. I think what I'll do now is just kind of reflect on probably what I'm most proud of from my NASA years. And it has nothing to do with a particular mission that I flew. And in fact, it's more about something that had longer reaching benefits to our space program. And, you know, you may or may not realize this, but most of an astronaut's time is spent on the ground, unless you're Scott Kelly, of course, and then the ratio is flipped. But for me, I spent most of my career, my 17-year career, on the ground, working in support of others, other missions, other crews, other activities. And so actually I was working with Charlie Precourt at the time, and I think I was deputy of the EVA branch at the time. And he lamented to me at this point that we really didn't have enough spacewalking astronauts to build the International Space Station. We had this huge wall of EVA, which basically meant that we had to do dozens and dozens of spacewalks every year, many more than we had ever done over the whole history of the space program. And he basically just had 12 people who were qualified through the traditional methods of getting trained and qualified, which basically consisted of 4 runs wherein you had to learn the skills of spacewalking, and then by the end of it, you needed to demonstrate that you were really good or you were off the list. You were not qualified. And so Charlie said to me, hey, we need to fix this. And so I went and I found the cleverest folks that I knew, and a good friend, Zane Ney, from the Mission Operations Directorate. He's an EVA instructor and very, very creative mind. And he and I set out to define exactly what the gold standard of spacewalking performance was. All the things that we do, getting in foot restraints, going in and out of airlocks, operating power tools, the communications, the crew coordination, the many things that go into a very complex spacewalk. And we pulled in 2 other people, Rich Govreau and Chris Looper, and we created this program where the entire office could kind of come back in and say, hey, you know, where are your strengths, where are your weaknesses? Let's train to those weaknesses. Let's get you up to that gold standard level, or to a point where we can qualify you. And I'm so proud to say that, you know, we were able to build the International Space Station, and I think in considerable part because we had the skills program that gave us a full complement of very highly qualified spacewalkers. I can't even imagine going out on my very first space mission and doing what Doug Wheelock did. You know, the 3 incredibly difficult, complex, audacious spacewalks with 4 training runs and a limited qual. So, you know, I think it's a real testament to Doug and to the others who followed in this program to build this International Space Station, which I think is a real gem. So again, I just wanted to salute some wonderful people and unsung heroes, Zane, Rich, and Chris. And then finally, I wanted to point out that the Astronaut Hall of Fame really has nothing to do with Brian or myself here today, or even the space pioneers in front of me. The Astronaut Hall of Fame was really created by the Mercury 7 astronauts to use their notoriety to help inspire and support financially our best and brightest in STEM fields. And so I'm so honored and excited to support the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation going forward. I think it's a brilliant program, and I also wanted to thank the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation for arranging this incredible event. Tammy and her team are the best. And so as you leave this place, I just wanted to put in one shameless plug, but please consider opening up your hearts and also your checkbooks and writing a big check to the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation as you leave this place. So in closing, I just wanted to congratulate all of the brilliant astronaut scholars who were here today. I wanted to congratulate and apologize to Brian for this well-deserved honor. And my thanks to the Astronaut Hall of Fame members who inspired and guided me and also selected me. And my thanks to all of you who have touched my life in such profound ways. Thank you. Live long and prosper.
Congratulations, Scott Parazynski, and welcome to the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame. He's another one that said he grew up watching you guys.
And them too.
And them too. And then he called you pioneers, like covered wagons and the... The 2016 inductees were selected by a committee of current Hall of Fame astronauts, former NASA officials, historians, and journalists. The process is administered by the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation. To be eligible, an astronaut must have made his or her first flight at least 17 years before the induction year and must be retired at least 5 years from NASA, the NASA Astronaut Corps. Candidates must be a U.S. citizen, NASA-trained commander, pilot, or mission specialist, and must have orbited the Earth at least once and made significant contributions to the study of space. Now, before we let you go, we have a special sneak peek in store for all of you today. We're going to unveil our new inductees displays that will be housed in the new United States Astronaut Hall of Fame later this year. Theron, you up here? Okay. Dan? Did you guys do the honors? Ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to present to you the United States astronaut, class of 2016, Brian Duffy and Scott Parazynski. And all the members of the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame, please join us for a photo. It has been my pleasure to be with you today. On behalf of the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex and the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation, thank you for joining us for this historic ceremony